Dear all, hello. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Andrei. I'm a co-president of Ukraine Support Alliance at Stanford, and I'm a fourth-year undergraduate here at Stanford studying physics. As you might know, 3 years ago, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, killing thousands and affecting millions of Ukrainians. And our organization, Ukraine Support Alliance at Stanford, arose naturally to help the cause of finding resources and connecting people at Stanford and the Bay Area to try to help Ukraine. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we managed to send a plane of humanitarian help to Ukraine. We also created an NGO and made a lot of other small achievements along the way. Today, we are here to recognize the unjust war that Russia has started and also bring awareness of people on campus towards this important moment in history. I would like to start with the national anthem of Ukraine.
Звинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, і служить сторонце, дишайте, Жень за нашим слова, лиш покажем, що ми браття козацька, світила лиша, Жень за нашим слова.
Later. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to announce a brief moment of silence for the lives of Ukrainians who were taken during the war. Thank you so much. And now for the main part of the rally, we have a lot of amazing speakers who are here to share their amazing work that they did for Ukraine. Some of them are Ukrainians and some of them are not. And I hope that the stories you'll hear today will inspire you to help however way you can. And our first speaker today is co-president of Ukraine Support Alliance at Stanford, Alisa. She's a PhD student in Slavic department, focusing on Ukrainian literature. Give a round of applause for Alisa.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone so much for being here. Today's obviously a very emotional and very difficult day. And it means so much to see all of you here. I really want to thank Kirilo, Bogdan, and Andriy who really put this all together. They've been organizing everything and I'm incredibly grateful to them. And just before I forget, the Ukrainian Support Alliance at Stanford, we meet bi-weekly. And the more people there, the more events we can host, the more change we can do. So please get in contact with any one of us to show up. But I'm going to keep my remarks pretty brief today because we have a lot of really incredible speakers. And so I'm just going to do a bit of an intro. But when I was thinking about what to say, I thought kind of like, what do I need to hear? This year is different than last year and the year before. Every year gets harder, but I think this year, for obvious political reasons, emotionally might be one of the hardest times we've had in a while. And I was thinking, what do I need to hear? And personally, I don't want to hear any sentimentalities. I want to hear about what is going on and what we need to do. I want to be concrete about the situation Ukraine finds itself in and think about what we can do. I think the main thing is it's exhausting to say the things that we all believe are common knowledge, but we must. That the things that are so part of our daily lives and we assume are obvious, apparently for the world are not obvious today, and we need to keep saying them. We need to educate, we need to tell our stories, and we need to share information. It's our duty to explain who Ukrainians are and that freedom and democracy are core values, and that peace in Ukraine secures peace in the USA. It is exhausting, but if we stop saying the things that are obvious to us, then Russian propaganda wins, right? So we can never say these things enough. We can never say enough that Russia started an unprovoked war against Ukraine. We can never say enough that Russia deliberately targets civilians, that Russian soldiers rape and torture civilians, that the greatest number of deaths are on occupied territories and we can't officially count them, so that civilian deaths are grossly underreported. We have to remind people that Ukrainian soldiers are our heroes. We have to remind people that Russia doesn't just want Eastern Ukraine or Ukraine. Russia wants Europe and beyond, right? We have to remind people that the sources that we see where Russia says this explicitly are the reality, and we can't let them warp that. We have to remind people that Ukrainian security is American security, and we need to remind people that we don't just need resources for Ukraine to be able to fight back this war. We need resources for Ukraine to win this war so that it can end. Because a little bit of money, we appreciate everything so much, but what we're doing right now is not enough. And unfortunately, with a president who is repeating Russian propaganda, who, whether he is officially or unofficially a Russian asset, he is certainly acting like one, and his actions are causing lives to be lost. I wanted to quickly read a poem by the Ukrainian poet Lina Kostenko in an English translation. It says, "One must truly have satanic intent and harbor an incurable madness to torture us so cruelly and then blame us for everything." This is what Trump is doing with Putin, right? On top of torturing Ukrainians, they are trying to blame them. And what we can do is fight back. When the world lowers its moral standards, we cannot lower ours. We cannot accept this normal. We cannot let terrorists and terrorist sympathizers set the bar for morality and ethics. We cannot lower our standards for justice. We have to start getting creative with fundraisers. We continue, not start, right? Continue. We have to flood medias in our communities with information regularly and vigorously. And as a community, we need to engage our friends, people who are not invested, people who are not Ukrainian, and keep talking to each other to combine skills. Let people in Ukraine know that we haven't abandoned them, because even the strongest people on earth need to feel support, especially right now. Everyone has different abilities and different capacities, so I just ask that you do what you can within your abilities and within your capacity, because we can't burn out. Unfortunately, this is a long fight, but it's one we won't back down from, and it's one we'll win. Ukraine has a future, and a very, very bright future, thanks to people like you. Thank you so much for being here today. It means the world.
Thank you so much, Elisa, for those words. The next speaker for today is Sasha Samuels. Sasha Samuels is a local artist who recently visited Ukraine to paint Ukrainian defenders who are undergoing rehabilitation in Superhumans and Unbroken. Sasha proposed and co-curated a major exhibition of contemporary Ukrainian trench art at the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It opened in June of last year and runs through April of 20th of this year. Sasha is a great friend of Ukraine. Please welcome Sasha to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here. After Russia's full-scale invasion, I was sending money to NGOs, and it just didn't feel like enough. I wasn't doing enough. And over time, I had the idea, and I mustered up the courage to go to Ukraine and paint some of the soldiers, as I'm a professional artist, and look them in the eye, thank them for their service, thank them for not just protecting their homeland and their friends and their communities and their families, but also for protecting all of Europe and democracy itself. So I went, I had no appointments. I found a homestay family. I found a friend to get me over the border, and that's where the adventure started. So I started out at Superhumans. I contacted somebody there, and they were scheduling an interview to see if I could handle what I was going to see. And I passed the interview, and I got in there, and I received a text from a woman named Yulia saying, hey, we're from this television station, national television station from Ukraine. We would like to come and interview you painting the soldiers. Now, my goal was to paint 10 guys, maybe help 10 guys and their families. I was not expecting to be on national television in Ukraine. So that was pretty awesome. The interview went great. The guys loved being painted. We had a really good time. And I want to emphasize, going into this rehabilitation center, I was kind of bracing myself what I was going to see. I knew there were going to be a lot of amputees. There was going to be a lot of dark humor. It was one of the most positive buildings I've ever had the privilege of spending time in. Everybody there is getting really robust psychological support, trauma support. This is the first trauma-informed war in human history. So the rehabilitation efforts are amazing. So if you're supporting Superhumans or Unbroken, understand that your dollars are really going far. So painting the guys, the next morning I was scheduled to go to Unbroken and paint some more guys. Now, by the way, I would say 90% of the gentlemen I painted were civilians. We had a international delivery driver, an IT specialist, a carpenter, several artists. They were all volunteers at the front. These were not professional soldiers. So I really want to emphasize that. It would be like you or I going to the front. So I get another text from Yulia saying, hey, we'd like to interview you at Unbroken. And I texted back. It was a different number than yesterday. And I said, well, you know, it went so well at Superhumans. I'm excited that you want to interview me again. This is great. And she texted back, what are you talking about? It was a different television station that wanted to broadcast what I was doing again. So, you know, the short moral of the story, if you help, your help may go much further than you realize. Never underestimate your strength and your power if you lean into something with courage. After painting the guys, one of them walked up to me. He had a prosthetic leg, and he said, hey, are you afraid to get into a car with a guy with one leg? And I said, you know, I'm from New York. I'm not afraid of anything. And he said, okay, my friends are having an art exhibition. Would you like to come? And I said, of course. So we're walking to his car. I'm assuming it's a car, like we all have a car. This was this beautiful BMW tricked out in exquisite camouflage. We get in, it's cream leather, upholstery, you know, burled wood. He turns on the radio and the song You're in the Army Now is playing. We're flying down these side streets and I'm realizing, you know, we're going way too fast, but I feel comfortable with this guy. He's seen a lot, you know, he's hypervigilant. He's going to get me there safely. So we get to this exhibition, and one of the most exquisite pieces of art was so moving. It was a shoulder-held rocket launcher that had been painted beautifully, and someone had dropped a virtual reality behind it. So if you photographed it with your phone and moved it, you could see this incredible reality. And I thought, my God, this needs to be in a show. The West needs to see this. So shortly after, I started finding out people were painting helmets and bullet casings and everything imaginable, all this war detritus. And so I contacted the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I sent them these images, and I said, you have to do a show of this. This is so relevant. This is so important to get this message out. And they got the funding, and in their Gallery of Conscience, they invited me to co-curate my first major museum exhibition. Again, this was not something I was originally signing up for, but again, leaning into doing something with courage, you have no idea what impact you might have. So the show we put together in 6 months. I was told normally a show of this complexity would take a year or two. We were told it would be impossible to get these objects out of Ukraine. We wound up having 65 objects for the exhibition. Tens of thousands of people have walked through this gallery, and more will be seeing this. These are people from all over the world visiting Santa Fe to see art. These are Americans who vote. So this was a really powerful reminder of what Ukraine is going through. And I think that's about it. I'm going to wrap up there and just say again, support Ukraine in any way you can. Understand that your support may go much further than you realize. And Slava Ukraini.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Our next speaker is Professor Michael McFall. Michael McFall is the director of the Friedman Spogli Institute for International Studies. He's also a professor in the Department of Political Science. Professor McFall was a great supporter of Ukraine since the day of the invasion, and we are very happy to have you here. Thank you, Professor.
So I talk louder than everybody else, I can tell. So thanks for having me. I'm actually not happy to be here. I don't think any of us are happy to be here. I can't believe we have to acknowledge this anniversary for the third year in a row. And I want to say three things to people that are from Ukraine or have family in Ukraine, and one thing to our Americans who are here. First, to those from Ukraine who have relatives in Ukraine who are enduring this barbaric war every day, every night, who have lost loved ones to this horrific imperial dictator that is threatening not just Ukraine, but the entire free part of Europe. I just want to say thank you on behalf of all people who believe in freedom. Thank you for your sacrifice. Second, to the Ukrainians that are here and people connected to Ukraine, as an American who really loves my country, by the way, I want to apologize for my president. I find this to be shameful, what he is doing, and I am deeply embarrassed as an American citizen for the things that he has said about your country, for the wrong things he has said about your president. And I feel really embarrassed by that, and I want to apologize to all Ukrainians for those comments. Third point, again, to Ukrainians. I want you to know that President Trump does not speak for all Americans.
Yes.
He is on the wrong side of history on this. He is on the wrong side of his own base. 81% of Americans, think about that for a minute. How many polls do we have where 80% agree to something? That does not happen in our polarized America today. And yet 81% of the American people do not trust Putin. Only 9% do. Trump is not with the American people on this issue today. And that gives me hope. And now my last comment is for the Americans. well, for Ukrainians too, but this is really to Americans. This is a hard, horrible day. I have hundreds of messages from friends, by the way, and former students. People had to have spoke here from all parts of Ukraine today. And my message was one of sorrow. My message was one of apology. And all of them were much more optimistic than I was. And they were saying, Mike, keep fighting. We are fighting. We are not done. And I think that's the biggest mythology that was talked about. Yes, there's so many crazy myths and disinformation, and I'm on TV. I'll be on TV tonight arguing about them again. Yes, it is a fact that Russia invaded Ukraine today, 3 years ago. We can't argue about that. You don't get to have opinions about facts. We have to do that. We have to keep fighting this disinformation. But the biggest thing we have to fight in my interactions with the Trump administration officials and other naysayers is this notion that Ukraine is losing and is a hopeless cause. I want to remind you, I listened very closely to President Putin's speech the 2 days before the 71-minute speech that he gave before he invaded your country. And he was very blunt. I used to interact with the guy. He's very clear. He's not messing. He's not trying to camouflage what he's seeking. He was very clear what he sought in invading Ukraine. Let's review the facts. First, Ukrainians know this, but the Americans might not know this. Putin doesn't think that Ukraine's a real country. And to the Ukrainians in the audience, he doesn't think you're Ukrainian. He thinks you're just Russians with accents. I've heard him say that about you. So he thought, by just using a little shock and awe, that he would be able to take over and unite the Slavic people. You defeated him. That has not happened. Ukraine today, in terms of an identity as a nation, is stronger than ever before. Number two, he said he was invading to denazify Ukraine. And by that he meant he sought to overthrow the democratically elected president of Ukraine, and not just overthrow it, he wanted to kill it. I know President Zelensky, I've talked about this before, when the history is written, we will know how close they became to achieving that objective, but they have not achieved that objective. President Zelensky is still the president of Ukraine. The Rada is still functioning. Denazification, if that was a goal, has not been achieved. Number two. Number three, demilitarization, he said that, has not achieved that goal. Number four, as was already expressed, he's not just interested in taking parts of Ukraine. He wants to go in the Russian history books as taking all of Ukraine. And he has not achieved that objective. And in fact, last year was the lowest amount of territory that they have achieved. Now, I'm not saying that Ukraine has the military might to liberate the country to the 1991 borders, but this notion expressed just by our vice president yesterday that Putin has all the firepower to march all the way to Kiev and take the rest of the country is simply not true. He has not achieved any of his objectives, and we need to educate the American people about that so that we can stop this absurd idea of pivoting to Putin and abandoning Ukraine, because we know from opinion polls that that is not true. And now we have to mobilize our country to reverse that cause, because if President Trump begins to fall in the polls, that gives us an opportunity to stop this horrific pivot and to get back to supporting the Ukrainian people. But I want to leave you with a positive message in my phone right here, from very senior government officials to just friends on the front line fighting. They're not stopping fighting. They know what's at stake. We have to fight with them too. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you so much, Professor McFall. The next speaker for today is Dan Klein. Then Klein teaches improvisation full-time at Stanford University, where he's one of the faculty of the drama department, Stanford Graduate School of Business, and teaches at the D School. In 2009, Dan was named Stanford Teacher of the Year by the Students Association. Beyond Stanford, Dan has led similar workshops, custom-tailored for various groups, including the High Performance Leadership Program at IMD Business School in Switzerland, and the Kaufman Fellow Program helping to train global leaders in the venue capital. Today, Dan will talk about his recent experience in Ukraine. Welcome, Dan, to the stage.
In 2017, my friend Alexander Sasha Akimenko invited me to Kyiv. They had just translated David Kelly's wonderful book, Creative Confidence, into Ukrainian, and they wanted me to come out and use that as an opportunity to teach about collaboration, connection, and creativity, and use it as a way to create some kind of events. I'd never been to Kyiv before. I was taken by the warmth and hospitality and the entrepreneurial drive of the Ukrainian people, and I was fascinated by the layers of history throughout the city. I learned about the famine. I learned about the Soviet architecture and the monuments of the Orange Revolution. I watched with most of the rest of the world in horror 3 years ago at the invasion, and I stayed in contact with Sasha. As the war continued, at some point he started inviting me to come out. He said, maybe you won't come to Kyiv, but maybe we can go to Lviv, where it's farther away from the action. And then, as we were planning a potential visit, he told me about a rocket that had hit just across the street from his building. I said, what was that like? He said, it was loud. It was so loud. So we thought, maybe I'll wait. Maybe I won't come quite yet. This past summer at the GSB, we hosted some people from Superhuman who were doing amazing things in the prosthetic limb industry. I sat with the CEO, Olga, at dinner. I said, I've been to Kyiv. I'm looking for an opportunity to come back. I'm just trying to figure out what's the right time. She looked me right in the eye and she said, the time is now. You need to come now. You need to see what's happening. And you need to tell the world what's happening. And we need to see you there. And I knew she was right. And within a couple months, I found myself landing in Moldova and then driving 10 hours through the night into Kyiv. This is what stood out to me. It looked pretty similar to the way it had in 2017, but with occasional burnt out buildings and rubble. As I arrived in the city center, there were the tanks from the initial invasion, scarred and rusted, sitting on display. It was the first day of school in the fall, and there were bands of kids walking with their teachers through the streets, looking at all of the blue and yellow ribbons, candles, monuments, at shrines, photographs, and altars to the heroes who had died. I downloaded the app, like Uber, that would warn me about the air raids. I stayed in a really nice hotel in the middle of the downtown, and every night the air raids would go off, and I would make my way down into the garage and sleep on a cot. I was amazed at how consistent the people were. They were living a life. They were tired, being woken up every night, having constant bombardment of not just actual physical assault, but also the news was horrifying. There was a children's hospital that had been bombed the week before I got there. While I was there, a school was hit with a missile, which is harder to get away from because you have much less time. And there was a man who was on his way to the bomb shelter with his family and lost his wife and 3 daughters. This news was constant, and the Ukrainians were tired. exhausted and angry and proud and resilient and committed. I heard, not with any artifice, we will win. And I believe it. I've never seen anything like this. The CEO of Superhuman had told me, you have to see what it's like to live under the threat of death constantly. There's nothing more motivating. She said, I've gotten more done since the war started than I had in my whole life up until that point. Walking around the city, I could see it. There were new restaurants, cafes, bookstores. People were living their life in defiance of what's happening right now. There was a fashion show. I've never seen anything quite so vibrant. It's horrifying to imagine what's happening, to see what's happening, to feel what's happening, to know it's still happening. I don't have any messages other than to say, I just want to echo what Michael McFaul just said. I want to say, thank you. We're sorry. And keep fighting. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you so much. The next speaker for today is Alem Kent. Alem Kent is a Crimean Tatar-American interdisciplinary documentary storyteller. The formats of their work has spanned from interactive performances, theater, film, podcasts, exhibits, to virtual reality. They aim to bring different cultures and audiences together to experience new stories and forms of storytelling, featuring the strengths and inspiration from Ukraine and Crimea. Alem is one of the co-founders of the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine's leading English news media organization. Alem is interested in how film can interact with people to further connect them with the life we have and the world around us. Welcome Alem to the stage.
Hello. Oh, sorry, I'm going to read this so I make sure I'm concrete in what I want to say. This time, 3 years ago, like many Ukrainians, I woke up to the sounds of sirens early in the morning. I was with my friend Katya, a native from Slavyansk, an eastern town of Ukraine that has had an intimate relationship to the front lines for 11 years now, and my Crimean Tatar mother, Velide. We were able to get out of the city through the help of a friend, someone we didn't know, a Belarusian journalist who was in exile. In all the chaos that occurred, it was only because of collective action we were able to help each other. But that's a crazy story for another time. I had been working in Ukraine as a journalist since 2019, and like Andrei said, I'm one of the co-founders of the Kyiv Independent. I left journalism to pursue nonfiction storytelling through different mediums, whether it be through documentary performance, film, photography, art protest, any variety of ways of engaging with the currency of truth in order to reach different audiences. Like it's been said multiple times today, we are in the age of misinformation and manipulation. It is easy to shut down and shut off the news because of the incredibly depressing state of the world, and how are we to trust the information that is coming through? We need to be actively engaged in order to be informed, in order to live. We cannot be passive. And as an acknowledgement of factual truths, despite what Russia and now Trump says, let me reiterate the facts and acknowledge it out loud. It has been 11 years of war, not 3. I notice people slip up sometimes, but I make sure to actively say every single time, full-scale war versus war. It's a small, passive slip-up, but it makes all the difference. 11 years of war that was not started by Ukraine, but starting with the Russian occupation of Crimea and the invasion of the East. Within 24 hours of Ukraine's successful revolution of dignity, Russian boots were on the ground in Crimea. February 26th was the largest protest organized in Crimea by Crimean Tatars, the indigenous people of Crimea. They're a close-knit Muslim community, so therefore they were really effective in coming together and starting the large protest. February 27th, the Russian soldiers seized the administrative buildings in Simferopol, and one of the first things they did was burn the historical archives, including ancient artifacts and scrolls. March 3rd, there was the public abduction of Crimean Tatar Reshat Ametov, who was conducting a single-person protest on the street with a sign. There's a video footage of him online, I think it's even on YouTube, of the Russians taking him and forcing him into a car. His tortured and mutilated body was found 3 weeks later. March 16th, the sham referendum. My Crimean Tatar friends who were there at the time refused to leave their homes to vote, not that they could anyway, as the streets were full of tanks and armed men. 11 years, over 221 imprisoned, 137 at least are Crimean Tatars suffering inhumane conditions and treatment. Going back to an earlier point, one of the first things that occupiers do when they occupy a Ukrainian village or town is to destroy the Budynek Kultury, the local house of culture. Why? I mean, some of these villages that they occupy are incredibly small, and the Budynek Kultury might not be some massive, impressive museum. It could literally just be a small house with one single room, a few portraits, or a book. But they make sure to destroy it every single time, one of the first things they do, because they know that culture is power, and history is power, and Ukrainian identity is power. I've come to Stanford as a master's student in the documentary film program. It's a really small, intense 2-year program. And I'm currently working on my last film, my thesis film that I filmed in Ukraine this January. My close friends have been verteping to the east since 2019. Vertep is an ancient Ukrainian tradition. It was born in the 17th century. It was the time of the national liberation movement when Ukrainians began to assert themselves against Polish-Lithuanian domination and influences of Moscow. This tradition, including kolyady, song and cheer, and live moral theater, was also banned in the Soviet Union, because they understood how much power culture, tradition, identity, and the act of coming together has. When this is all in place, the Russian Empire has no chance, so they seek to eradicate it at every turn. We say 11 years of war, but Ukrainians know that we've been fighting against this aggressor for centuries. After crossing the border of Ukraine because of the full-scale attack 3 years ago, my mother burst into tears, stating that the same forces that forced her grandparents out of their home during Stalin's genocide and deportation of Crimean Tatars were doing the same exact thing 80 years later to her child. The areas that I filmed at this January were safe enough for civilians to travel to at the time. We do not know if that may be the case in the future. The city of Pokrovsk, where the famous song, The Carol of the Bells, was written, had almost been fully occupied by the Russians at that time. The Ukrainians had 2 kilometers left. It was a different region where we were, but every day we would watch on the map as the occupiers crawled forward. The tradition of vertep and its carols are taboo in occupied territories today. If people were to do so, they would disappear and be punished. Just as the composer of the Carol of the Bells, Mykola Leontovich, was over 100 years ago when he was executed by the Soviet secret police. 2 months later, his song premiered at Carnegie Hall and became the world-famous song that it is today. The filming of this ritual and songs in these territories was vital because in the worst-case scenario, this could be the last time vertep could be freely sung in these parts of eastern Ukraine. And now at least we have this archive of it, so we can always go back and see what was. When I was talking about this project with a friend of mine, Pauline, we started to ask, what does it mean to perform when the world has collapsed? To turn war zones, bullet-ridden walls into zones of song, dance, of folklore, and wonder. I have many instances here when I look around and nothing makes sense. In Donetsk Oblast this January, everything made sense. Life had meaning. Perhaps it was because of the collective community action. From the soldiers, the babushkas, the children, the songs we sang together felt more powerful than any occupying army will ever feel. As we mark 11 years of war, we must find our ways to fight collectively together. We cannot do this alone, and we must find ways to support each other and practice staying engaged, as we are in this for the long game. When asked, how do we do it? How do we continue on? We just do. we have no choice, and we don't. Many are robbed of the chance to continue on, sacrificing their lives in order to defend and liberate occupied territories. I had this in mind the entire time we were traveling for Vertep this January, from Kharkiv to Izyum to Slavyansk to Kramatorsk. It's in Kramatorsk that this following audio snippet that's in my project takes place in. I'll end my talk with it, reflecting on how we engage with the difficulties that we live to day and actively transform it for the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alim, for this powerful speech. Next speaker for today is Ethan Novak. Ethan Novak is a professor of philosophy at Stanford. His research is on the intersection of philosophy of language, and he'll talk about his recent experience in Ukraine. He visited Kiev and
Hello, thanks very much for having me. It's an honor. Can't say, as Professor McFall said, I also am not in a position to say that it's a pleasure to be here. My work has to do with linguistic justice, so I've been interested in Ukraine for a very long time. I speak Russian, traveled frequently to Ukraine, and did research while speaking Russian. After the full-scale invasion, I guess I heard many people say to me, please don't speak Russian, could you please try to speak to us in Ukrainian? And so I started the process of switching from Russian to Ukrainian. I thought I would talk about what that process was like and how it interfaces with some of the things that I do in my research, but I woke up this morning and felt so bleak that I thought I would do something else. And I thought I would share a small story that I hope illustrates some of the ways in which we might come together to try and do something. So last summer in June, I was in Lviv at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and I was taking Ukrainian classes, and I met a retired Swedish soldier who was starting from scratch. He had no Slavic language background and wanted to learn Ukrainian, which is not an easy thing to do if you have no background in any Slavic language. And I said, why is it that you want to learn Ukrainian? He said, I don't think that Russia will win. I believe that Russia will not win. But if Russia were to win, I want it to be the case that at least some people somewhere will continue to speak Ukrainian. I thought this was kind of a strange view. There are roughly 40 million Ukrainians. It doesn't seem like the language is at great risk of going extinct. But I thought that it was an interesting way of approaching the task. And I thought that it illustrated a sense in which the person had hope. Now, it sounds paradoxical because he's planning for the worst. He's planning for a circumstance in which the Ukrainian language ceases to exist, except for one second language Ukrainian speaker who speaks fairly poorly, who lives somewhere in Sweden. But I thought, on a day as bleak as today, maybe there's something we could take from the example. So what I thought was that if we allow ourselves to be overcome by despair, if we allow ourselves to think that evil will prevail, that we will turn into some degenerate version of Russia where the democracy collapses and sort of the worst among us run the country, then there's a sense in which we make that outcome more probable. And as long as we're sort of not optimistic, but not resigned to the fact that the worst will happen, then we have sort of the psychic energy to do something. And it struck me that the thing that this person did was to try and position himself to be a repository of something valuable. And I think, for me personally at least, when I think both about the Ukrainian language, the culture that we are able to access through it, and the example that Ukraine has provided us since the Revolution of Dignity, an example that shows the kinds of values that I thought everyone in this country shared, and which I thought our country was meant to be a protector of. I think there's a sense in which I see the little ember of hope, the kind of ember of hope that this Swedish former soldier had hoped to carry around. And I think if all of us cast our attention onto that hopeful ember, maybe we'll be able to come together and keep the flame burning until such time as we're able to fan it fully into what we would have hoped it would have been much sooner than it seems like will now be the case. On that, I want to stop. I don't want to foreground myself, but I want to point out, so what are the kinds of things that we might do? Well, one thing that I'm hoping to bang the drum of is that we ought to bear witness. We can come together, one of us can speak, another can listen. In connecting, we put our energies together and make it more likely that we'll be able to keep hopeful, and by being hopeful, more likely that we'll be able to find ways forward. I want to call attention to an event that will be happening on Wednesday at 5 p.m. in the Slavic department. So the Ukrainian author and now playwright, Volodymyr Rafeenko, will come to give readings from his play, Signals of Being. Rafeenko was a first language Russian speaker from Donetsk who fled as a refugee at the beginning of the war, the beginning of the original war, survived the atrocities in Bucha, and is bearing witness, as it were, through his cultural production to the things that Ukraine has gone through, and I think to the values, the universal values that I assume everyone here aspires to be a bearer of. So anyone who can make it 5 p.m. on Wednesday, you're invited. Thank you very much for your time.
We still have a little bit of time left, and if there's anyone from this community of people who would like to say a couple of words, please come to the left side of the stage, and yes, microphone is yours.
Slava Ukraini. My name is Bogdan. I'm a member of community here, and I'm so grateful for having all of you here as a part of our community. 3 years ago on this evening, I remember we gathered in San Francisco, and I barely knew any Ukrainians at that point in the Bay Area or on campus, but somehow we gathered and we had this desire to do something to answer this unjust, unprovoked war. A couple of students here at Stanford came up with a variety of ideas, and one that I want to talk about was they formed a nonprofit organization called Telehelp Ukraine. So we're providing medical consultation and psychological help to Ukrainians. The idea came from just meetings that we had here daily, or actually nightly, for some time in the spring of 2022. And we've been helping people in Ukraine with the support from international community of physicians. The reason why I'm saying all of this is I'm grateful for seeing all of the Ukrainians. I'm grateful that you're finding community here in one another. I'm grateful to all the international community that is keeping us in their hearts and their minds. I'm grateful to those of you who are believing in freedom and democracy and donating to humanitarian causes. I'm grateful to those of you who believe in justice and donating to military causes. I'm hopeful that we will not need to meet here next year, because I was telling to some of you today, sadly, I already know how to put that flag that it's like standing there, because I've been doing it for 3 years. And it's sad. It breaks my heart that we have to do it every year, and we don't really have much of a happy anniversaries happening in February. And I hope that in 10 years, in 20 years, and your kids, your grandkids will know that when Ukraine was suffering from this brutal genocidal war, you did something that mattered. You did something that changed someone's life, that you did something that you are proud of yourself, you're proud of your kids. Don't just come to these events and it's like, hey, just statistics. We're going to gather here next year. Probably Professor McFall will be saying something. We greatly appreciate him for everything he does for us, for supporting our community of Ukrainians on campus. Few other distinguished guests will be saying something, but please let's make sure that if you are American, call your representative, call your senators. We need to make sure that Ukraine will win this war. Otherwise, we're not going to be meeting with so many Ukrainian flags going forward. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraini! Слава нації! Україна!
Слава Україні! Доброго вечора всім. Мене звати Наталка Ковальчук, я професор тут у Стенфорді також. Я працюю в радіаційній онкології. Ми також робимо все, що можемо, щоб допомогти Україні. So I'll switch to English now. I am a professor here at Stanford. My name is Natalia Kovalchuk, and we founded Help Ukraine Group to support cancer centers in Ukraine during the war. What we are doing, we are organizing training for them. We are inviting them for observerships. But why I'm here, I wanted to introduce my daughter, Vivienne Niedermeyer. She wanted to recite a poem, Ukrainian poem, by Shevchenko.
Наша дума, наша пісня, не мре, не загине. Оте, люди, наша слава, слава України.
Слава.
Без золота, без каменю, без хитрої мови. Голосна та правдива, як Господа слово. Слава! Слава Україні!
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Solin. I'm working at NASA's agricultural program and we monitor Ukraine. We're helping Ukraine to monitor how much Russia is growing on occupied territories and stealing our wheat, corn, and everything what comes to agriculture. I'm glad to help. I'm gonna switch to Ukrainian just for 1 minute because I wrote something on my Facebook today that helped me to cope with the third year, and it's very quick, and people who need help the most, I believe they would understand Ukrainian, so sorry about that. Росія і всі росіяни, бажаю вам безупинно гнити, морально і фізично, допоки страждання не переважить бажання жити. Ви всі привели до того, що ми зараз маємо, в той час, коли українці відстоювали кожну несправедливість ціною свободи і життя, для того, щоб не сталося того, що є у вас, в вашій країні. Путін мене, ви згинете, а українські покоління, базовані на принципах моралі і хоробрості боронити свободу, нікуди не дінуться. Це боротьба з очевидним і неминучим програшем для Росії. Чи дійде це до вас зараз, чи через 100 років. З роковинами люба нація, бажаю всім нам сили. Дякую.
I would like to thank everyone for coming today and commemorating this important point in history. I would like to play Ukrainian national anthem one more time and to close our rally. Thank you so much.
Ще вмирає в країні ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душа тіла ми положим за нашу свободу. Лиш покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу тіла ми положим за нашу свободу. Що ми браття козацького роду.
Thank you so much for coming.